The massive doors of the Galactic Council chambers opened with a deep rumble that echoed through the vast space. High Counselor Thisra stepped forward, her crystalline body catching the light from 1,000 different suns streaming through the chamber's transparent dome. But today her usual bright glow was dim, almost grey with worry. She carried a small datapad in her 3-fingered hands, but that simple device contained the most terrible news her species had ever received. The numbers on the screen spelled out their doom in cold, precise calculations. A neutron star, one of the most dangerous objects in the universe, was heading straight for their home system, not to crash into their world, but something almost worse. It would pass close enough to bathe their planet in deadly radiation. The chamber itself was enormous, built to accommodate representatives from dozens of different alien species. Some breathed oxygen like humans, others needed methane or hydrogen. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few like the Veltari were made of living crystal. But they all had one thing in common today. They were about to hear a desperate plea for help. Thisra looked around the circular chamber at the 12 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. These weren't just any alien species. These were the big players, the ones with massive fleets of spaceships, endless resources and technology that could move entire worlds if they wanted to. If anyone could help her people, it would be them. She cleared her throat, and the sound was picked up by the universal translators that hung from the ceiling like metallic flowers. These amazing devices could turn her crystal singing voice into words that every species could understand in their own language. "Honored representatives of the great civilizations," she began, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I come before you today, not as a politician or a diplomat, but as someone whose entire species faces complete extinction." The chamber fell silent. Even the usual whispers and side conversations stopped. Extinction was a word that got everyone's attention, no matter what species you were. "Our scientists have been tracking an approaching neutron star for the past year," Thisra continued, holding up her datapad. "At first we thought it would pass safely by our system, but new calculations show we were wrong. Terribly wrong." She touched the pad, and a holographic display appeared above her head, showing her beautiful homeworld. It was a planet of crystal cities that sparkled like jewels, with flowing rivers of liquid light and forests of singing crystal trees. It was paradise, and it was doomed. "The neutron star will pass within 2 light-years of our world in exactly 8 standard months," she said, her voice getting quieter as the terrible reality sank in. "The radiation it gives off will destroy our atmosphere completely. Every living thing on our planet will die. All 2.3 billion of my people." The hologram changed, showing the predicted path of destruction. Red zones spread across the planet like a plague, marking areas where life would become impossible. Soon the entire world was covered in red. "We have tried everything," Thisra pleaded. "Our best scientists, our most advanced technology, our entire military fleet working together. But we cannot stop a neutron star. We cannot change its path. We cannot shield our world from radiation this powerful. Our only hope is evacuation." She looked around the chamber at each delegation, her crystal eyes reflecting the light like prisms. "We need help moving 2.3 billion people to safety. We need ships, supplies, and new worlds where our people can live. We are asking you, the greatest powers in the galaxy, to help us survive." The Morvani delegate stood up first. He was a large, imposing figure with 4 powerful arms and skin like polished metal. His species controlled one of the biggest military forces in the galaxy. Surely he would help, but his 4 arms moved in a gesture that Thisra recognized as dismissal. "The Morvani hegemony understands your situation," he said in a voice like grinding gears, "but our resources are completely committed to the Outer Rim conflicts. We cannot spare ships or personnel for evacuation operations." Thisra felt her crystal heart sink, but she turned to the next delegation. The Luxari Collective were beings of pure energy who lived inside specially designed robotic bodies. They were incredibly advanced and wise. Certainly they would see the moral necessity of helping. The 3 Luxari representatives spoke together, their voices creating perfect harmony. "We observe the universe and record its patterns. We do not interfere with natural processes. This has been our way for 1,000,000 years. We cannot break this sacred law even for extinction. One by one, the other great powers offered their excuses. The Zenith Empire was dealing with internal rebellions. The Cosmic Trade Federation said there was no profit in refugee operations. The Stellar Alliance claimed their ships were needed for border patrol. The Void Watchers said they had prior commitments to other species. Each rejection hit Thysera like a physical blow. These weren't just governments turning down a request for help. These were the only beings in the galaxy with the power to save her people, and they were all saying no. The session dragged on for hours, but the result never changed. Sympathy, regret, and refusal. The great powers offered kind words and empty promises to remember the Veltari fondly after they were gone. The massive chamber doors began to close and the delegates filed out. Thysera stood alone in the center of the room. The hologram of her doomed world still flickered above her head, a constant reminder that somewhere far away, a neutron star continued its deadly approach. Her people had 8 months to live, and the galaxy had abandoned them to die. 3 days had passed since the devastating rejection at the Galactic Council, and High Counselor Thysera sat in her embassy office, staring at the holographic countdown on her desk. 7 months, 29 days, 14 hours. That's how much time her people had left before the neutron star's radiation would make their world uninhabitable. The Veltari embassy station orbited a neutral moon, serving as their diplomatic outpost in this sector of space. It was a beautiful structure made of the same living crystal as their homeworld, but today its usual warm glow felt cold and lifeless. Ships came and went from the docking bays below, but none brought the help her people desperately needed. Thysera had spent the last 3 days sending desperate messages to smaller civilizations, hoping that maybe the minor powers would show more compassion than the major ones. But the responses were all the same. Too small to help, not enough resources. Sorry for your loss. Her assistant, a young Veltari named Kesri, chimed softly at the door. High Counselor, there's a small craft requesting permission to dock. They claim to be from the Human Colonial Administration. Thysera's crystal form dimmed even further. Humans. She had heard of them, of course, a relatively new species that had only been traveling between stars for a few hundred years. They were considered one of the junior species by the galactic community. Nice enough but hardly important players in galactic politics. They had no massive fleets, no ancient wisdom, no incredible technology that could move planets. Tell them I appreciate their sympathy, Thysera said wearily. But unless they're here with a fleet of 10,000 ships, there's nothing they can do that the great powers couldn't. Actually, Kesari said hesitantly, they specifically requested a meeting about evacuation logistics. They said they have a proposal. Thysera almost laughed, but it would have come out as bitter crystal chimes. Humans wanted to talk about logistics. What could a junior species possibly know about moving 2.3 billion people across the galaxy? Still, what did she have to lose? Her people were already doomed. Fine, send them to conference room 3. I'll be there in a few minutes. The human shuttle was small and practical, nothing like the grand vessels the major powers used for diplomatic missions. It was painted in simple white and blue colors, with HCA Explorer written on the side. As Thysera watched through the embassy's crystal walls, she saw 3 humans step out of the airlock. The leader was a man of medium height with short black hair and kind eyes behind simple glasses. He wore a dark blue uniform with minimal decorations, and he carried what looked like a standard data tablet. Behind him, a woman with her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail carried a larger device that looked like a portable computer. The third human, a younger man, had his arms full of data storage units. Commander Li Dongwu had been preparing for this meeting since the moment he heard about the Galactic Council's rejection. As head of the Human Colonial Administration's Emergency Response Division, he had seen his share of disasters. Asteroid impacts, solar flares, planetary evacuations due to volcanic activity. But nothing on this scale. Nothing where an entire species faced extinction. The conference room was a marvel of Veltari engineering, with walls that seemed to be grown rather than built. The table in the center was made of the same living crystal, and it hummed softly with internal energy. Thysera entered a few minutes after the humans had settled in, and Dongwu could immediately see the exhaustion and despair in her crystalline features. "Commander," Thisera said, her translated voice carrying barely concealed frustration, "while we appreciate the gesture, the major powers have already made their position clear. If 12 great civilizations cannot help us, I'm not sure what 3 humans can do." Dongwu leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but compassionate. "Made their position clear," he said, finishing her sentence gently. "Yes, we heard about the council session, but we're not here as a major power, High Counselor. We're here as beings who believe that extinction is unacceptable. Period." Something in his tone made Thisera pause. There was no diplomatic doublespeak, no careful political language, just a simple statement of belief delivered with absolute conviction. Captain Park Ji-Hai opened her portable computer and began activating holographic displays above the crystal table. "High Counselor, we've been working around the clock since we heard about your situation. We've identified 23 viable relocation sites in Terran-controlled space. The holograms showed star maps, planet specifications, and resource calculations." Thisera found herself leaning forward despite her skepticism. The data was incredibly detailed, showing atmospheric compositions, gravity levels, and even preliminary terraforming requirements for worlds that weren't quite suitable for Veltari. Physiology. "Our preliminary logistics analysis," continued Lieutenant Kim Min-ho as he connected his data storage units to the table's systems, "suggests we can evacuate 89% of your population within the available time frame." Thisera stared, at the humans, then at their data, then back at the humans. The evacuation plan spread out before her was more detailed and comprehensive than anything the great powers had even attempted to draft. It included shipping schedules, supply chain management, temporary housing solutions, and even cultural integration programs. "This is," she began, then stopped. The plan accounted for everything. Food requirements for a crystal-based species, atmospheric needs, social structures, even psychological support for refugees leaving their ancestral home. "How long did you spend preparing this?" 72 hours, Dongwu replied simply, "since the moment we heard about the Council's decision. We haven't slept much." Park Ji-Hai pulled up another display, showing the human colonial fleet. "We've already begun preliminary mobilization. Every civilian transport, cargo hauler and passenger liner in human space is being prepared for conversion to refugee transport. Our military vessels are being retrofitted with expanded life support systems." "But why?" Thisera asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your species barely knows us. We have no trade agreements, no military alliances, no shared history. Why would you risk everything for people you've never met?" Dongwu was quiet for a moment. Then he stood and walked to the crystal window overlooking the docking bays. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about old Earth," he said, "about times when entire groups of people faced extinction and how some people chose to help while others chose to look away. She always said that you judge a civilization not by its technology or its power, but by what it does when someone needs help." He turned back to face Thisera. "The great powers looked at your situation and saw problems. Political complications, resource expenditures, economic burdens. We looked at your situation and saw 2.3 billion people who deserve to live." Thisera felt something she hadn't experienced in days: hope. It was small and fragile, like a newly formed crystal, but it was real. "You're serious," she whispered, and it wasn't a question anymore, it was wonder. "Deadly serious," Kim Min-ho confirmed, and for the first time since the neutron star had been discovered, Thisera allowed herself to believe that her people might actually survive. The moment Commander Lee Dongwu's shuttle left the Veltari embassy, something extraordinary began happening across human space. Within hours of his encrypted message reaching Earth, emergency sirens were wailing in every major spaceport from Sol to the outer colonies. But these weren't warnings of attack or disaster. They were the sound of an entire species mobilizing to save another. Admiral Choi Hae-jin stood on the bridge of the massive command ship, New Sol, watching as thousands of data streams flowed across the holographic displays surrounding him. Each stream represented a different ship, a different crew, a different piece of the largest rescue operation in galactic history. At 62 years old, Hai-Jin had seen 3 wars, 2 major asteroid impacts, and the evacuation of an entire moon colony. But nothing had prepared him for this. "Admiral," called out Lieutenant Commander Park So-min from her station, "we're getting confirmation signals from the Centauri yards. All military transports are reporting ready for conversion within 6 days. Mars shipyards are ahead of schedule," added Commander Yu Jae-sung. "They're pulling workers from the commercial projects and running triple shifts." Hai-Jin nodded grimly. The numbers were staggering. In just 2 weeks, they needed to convert over 4,000 ships to carry crystalline life forms safely across hundreds of light years. Most military planners would have called it impossible. Most politicians would have called it insane. But humanity had a long history of doing impossible and insane things when people needed help. Down in Engineering Bay 7, engineer Yoon So-young wiped sweat from her forehead as she stared at the complex atmospheric processor in front of her. She had been working for 18 hours straight, surviving on coffee and determination. Around her, dozens of other engineers were tearing apart life support systems and rebuilding them from scratch. "The Veltari don't breathe oxygen like we do," she explained to her exhausted team. "They absorb energy from specific gas mixtures through their crystal structure. It's like they're part plant, part mineral, part something we don't even have a name for." Her assistant, Engineer Kim Hyun-woo, looked up from his tablet with confusion. "So, how do we keep them alive during transport?" "We modify the atmospheric processes to create microenvironments," So-young replied, pointing to her redesigned system. "Each passenger section gets its own customized atmosphere. It's incredibly complex, but we can do it. We have to do it." The work was backbreaking. Every ship in the human fleet needed major modifications. Military vessels designed for war had to be converted into refugee carriers. Luxury cruise ships that normally carried wealthy tourists were being stripped down and rebuilt for maximum passenger capacity. Even old cargo freighters that should have been scrapped years ago were being pressed back into service. Captain Han Seok-jin coordinated the massive logistics operation from a cramped office on Lunar Station. His walls were covered with digital displays, showing the real-time location of every single vessel in the rescue fleet. Red dots represented ships still being converted. Yellow dots were ships in transit to assembly points. Green dots were ships ready for the evacuation run to Veltari space. "We need the convoy from Proxima Centauri to speed up," he called out to his team. "The Veltari are sending us updated population distributions, and we're going to need those heavy lifters in the northern continent zones." His logistics coordinator, Major Lee Kyung-suk, pulled up new calculations on her screen. "If we push the engine modifications on the freight haulers, we can cut transit time by 12%, but we'll be running those engines way beyond safe limits." "Do it," Han Seok-jin replied without hesitation. "We'll replace engines, we can't replace lives." Meanwhile, Dr. Lee Yu-jin was working with a team of Veltari scientists who had arrived on a fast courier ship to help with the technical details. The xenobiology lab aboard the research station, Discovery, had been converted into a crash course in crystalline life forms. "Your species is fascinating," Dr. Yu-jin told her Veltari counterpart, scientist Plexara, as they studied crystal samples under powerful microscopes. "Your cellular structure is unlike anything we've encountered before." "We are concerned about transport shock," Plexara replied, her translated voice tinkling like wind chimes. "Our people have never been separated from our homeworld's energy. Failed for extended periods. We do not know how our bodies will react." "We'll figure it out," Dr. Yu-jin said confidently. "We're designing portable energy field generators for each transport. Think of them as crystal life support systems." Word of the human mobilization spread quickly through galactic diplomatic channels. In the luxurious chambers of the Morvani High Command, Ambassador Threxall received daily reports about the human rescue effort with growing disbelief. "Sir," his aide reported nervously, "intelligence confirms that the humans have mobilized their entire civilian space fleet. Over 4,000 vessels are being converted for the Veltari evacuation." "That's impossible," Threxall rumbled, his 4 arms gesturing dismissively. "No species has that kind of organizational capability. The logistics alone would require the Humans appear to have solved the logistics problem, sir. They've created a real-time tracking system that coordinates thousands of ships simultaneously. Their cargo capacity calculations show they can actually transport the entire Veltari population. Threxal fell silent. The Morvani hegemony had refused to help because they claimed it was logistically impossible. But here were the humans, a species with a fraction of their resources, making it happen in real time. Similar conversations were happening in the crystal palaces of the Luxari Collective and the floating cities of the Ethereal Alliance. The great powers were watching in amazement as humanity demonstrated something they had never seen before: the ability to organize controlled chaos on a galactic scale. In human space, the work continued around the clock. Welders worked in zero gravity to modify cargo bays. Programmers rewrote navigation systems to handle convoy formations of unprecedented size. Medical teams trained in crystalline first aid. Even civilian volunteers were organizing supply drives to provide food and comfort items for the refugees. The most remarkable thing wasn't the technology or the engineering. It was the attitude. Every single human involved in the operation understood that they were racing against time to save an entire species from extinction. There were no complaints about overtime, no arguments about cost, no debates about whether it was worth the risk. Admiral Choi Hai-jin summed it up best during one of his daily briefings. "We're not just moving people from one place to another. We're proving that civilization means something. We're showing the galaxy that when extinction comes knocking, someone should answer the door." As the second week ended, the impossible was becoming merely improbable. The human rescue fleet was taking shape, and for the first time since the neutron star had been discovered, the Veltari had reason to hope they might actually survive. The great powers had said it couldn't be done. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. Captain Nam Ju-hyuk gripped the controls of his ship Harmony as the beautiful blue-green world of Veltari Prime came into view through the cockpit windows. After months of preparation and weeks of travel, the first wave of human rescue ships had finally arrived. But seeing the Veltari homeworld made the reality of their mission hit home in a way that no amount of planning could prepare them for. The planet below was stunning. Crystal cities sparkled like diamonds across the continents, connected by rivers of flowing light that pulsed with natural energy. Massive crystal formations jutted up from the surface like frozen music, each one singing with harmonic frequencies that the ship's sensors could detect even from orbit. It was a world of impossible beauty, and in just 4 months it would be a dead rock floating in space. Harmony. "This is Veltari Traffic Control," came a melodic voice through the ship's communication system. "You are cleared for orbital insertion. Zone 7. Welcome to our world and thank you for coming." Ju-hyuk felt a lump in his throat. The Veltari controller's voice carried such gratitude, such desperate hope, that it made the enormous responsibility of their mission feel almost overwhelming. Behind him, his crew was already preparing the passenger compartments they had spent weeks modifying for crystalline life forms. "Copy that, traffic control," Ju-hyuk replied. "The Harmony is honored to be here. We're ready to begin passenger transfers immediately." Within hours, the evacuation was in full swing. Human ships formed a constant stream between the planet's surface and the orbital assembly points, where larger vessels waited to begin the long journey to safety. The logistics were staggering. Every 6 hours, another wave of transport shuttles would launch from the planet's surface, packed with Veltari families carrying whatever belongings they could manage. Pilot Oh Da-un had been flying evacuation runs for 3 days straight, catching only brief naps between flights. Her small transport shuttle, Swiftwing, could carry 50 Veltari passengers per trip, and she had already completed over 20 runs. Her hands were cramping from gripping the controls, and her eyes burned from staring at navigation displays, but she refused to take a break. "Dayun, you need to rest," her co-pilot Kim Tae-won told her as they approached the surface for another pickup. "You're going to make a mistake if you keep pushing like this." "There are families down there waiting for us," she replied, adjusting their approach vector with practiced precision. "Every trip we don't make is people who might not get out in time. I can sleep when they're safe." The passenger loading areas on the planet's surface were organized chaos. Veltari civilians stood in long lines with their children and elderly. Each family allowed only 2 small containers of personal belongings. Human ground crews worked alongside Veltari officials to process thousands of refugees every hour, checking names against massive evacuation lists and ensuring everyone got assigned to the right transport. Medical officer Kang Minjae had spent the last month studying everything he could about Veltari physiology, but treating actual patients was completely different from reading medical texts. When stressed or frightened, Veltari could develop fractures in their crystal structure, similar to how humans might get stress headaches or muscle tension. "It's okay," he told a young Veltari child whose arm crystal was showing hairline cracks from the trauma of leaving home. "This won't hurt. I'm just going to use this sonic resonator to help your crystal structure realign itself." The child's parent, a tall Veltari whose name translated roughly to Song of Morning Light, watched nervously as Kang Minjae worked. "Will my child be all right on the long journey?" she asked through the universal translator. "Your child will be fine," Kang Minjae assured her, though privately he was still learning how to treat conditions he had never seen before. "We have medical teams on every ship, and we're all learning how to take care of your people." But not every rescue mission went smoothly. The transport ship Rising Hope was carrying 30,000 Veltari refugees when disaster struck. Captain Lee Hyun-woo was an experienced pilot, but even experienced pilots couldn't predict when a solar storm would surge through their flight path at exactly the wrong moment. "Mayday, Mayday," came the frantic transmission from Rising Hope. "We're experiencing cascade system failures. Main power is down, life support is failing. We have 30,000 souls aboard, and we're losing structural integrity." The rescue ships in the area immediately changed course to help, but they were too far away. Captain Lee Hyun-woo and his crew fought desperately to save their ship, working in teams to manually restart failed systems while the hull groaned around them. But some battles can't be won, no matter how brave or skilled the people fighting them. The Rising Hope and everyone aboard disappeared in a brief flash of light that was visible from the planet's surface. 30,000 Veltari civilians and 47 human crew members were gone in an instant. The tragedy sent shockwaves through both species, but it also strengthened their resolve. The Veltari saw how the humans had died trying to save them. The humans saw how much every single life mattered. Commander Bae Sung-ho was piloting an old cargo freighter called Second Chance that had been scheduled for scrapping before the evacuation began. The ship was ancient, held together with spare parts and determination, but it was still spaceworthy. When he reached his assigned pickup zone, Bae Sung-ho found twice as many refugees waiting as his ship was designed to carry. "Commander," his engineer warned him over the intercom, "we're already at maximum safe capacity. If we take on more passengers, we'll be pushing the life support systems beyond their limits." Bae Sung-ho looked out at the thousands of Veltari families still waiting for transport. Many of them were holding young children, their crystal forms dim with exhaustion and fear. The regulations said his ship could safely carry 1,500 passengers. There were 3,000 people waiting. "We leave no one behind," he transmitted to Fleet Command as his crew began helping more refugees aboard. "If the life support systems can handle it for even a few hours, that's enough time to get them to safety." The Second Chance groaned and creaked as it lifted off from the planet's surface, its hull stressed far beyond what the original designers had intended. Warning lights flashed throughout the ship as systems struggled to keep up with demand. But Commander Bae Sung-ho and his crew had made their choice. They would rather risk their own lives than leave anyone behind. Across the galaxy, other civilizations watched the human evacuation effort with growing amazement. The Morvani High Command had monitoring stations tracking every human ship movement. The Luxari Collective observed the operation through their deep space sensors. Even the mysterious Void Watchers, who rarely paid attention to lesser species, were keeping track of the human rescue fleet. "They're actually doing it," the Morvani ambassador reported to his superiors with something like awe in his voice. "The humans are evacuating an entire planet. Their logistics coordination is more advanced than anything we've seen from a junior species." "Impossible," came the reply from Morvani headquarters. "No civilization has the organizational capability." to move 2.3 billion people across interstellar distances. Sir, they're not just moving them, they're doing it efficiently. Their casualty rate is lower than our own military transport operations. These humans are accomplishing what our own strategists said was logistically impossible. The great powers had spent centuries believing that only they had the resources and wisdom to handle major galactic crises. But here was humanity, barely 300 years in space, organizing the largest rescue operation in galactic history. They were doing it without the advanced technology of the Luxari, without the massive fleets of the Morvani, without the ancient wisdom of the Ethereal Alliance. They were doing it with determination, creativity, and an unshakable belief that every life was worth saving. As the evacuation continued, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The junior species was teaching the galaxy what it really meant to be civilized. Captain Park Ji-Hai pressed her hand against the cold metal of the observation window aboard the command ship New Seoul. 8 months had passed since that first desperate meeting at the Veltari embassy, and now she was watching the final chapter of the greatest rescue operation in galactic history. Below them, the last human transport ship was pulling away from what had once been Veltari space. The final dawn carried the last group of evacuees, mostly scientists and government officials, who had stayed until the very end to coordinate the evacuation. Captain Park could see the ship's running lights getting smaller as it accelerated toward the jump point that would take it to safety. Behind the departing transport, Veltari Prime hung in space like a beautiful blue-green jewel. But that beauty was deceptive. The neutron star's radiation front was already washing over the planet's outer atmosphere, beginning the slow process of stripping away everything that had made it a world of life. In a few hours, the crystal cities would go dark forever. The singing forests would fall silent. 2 billion years of evolution would come to an end. Final transport has cleared the danger zone, reported Commander Yu Jae-sung from his position at the sensor station. All Veltari ships are accounted for. The evacuation is complete. Park Ji-Hai felt a mixture of triumph and sadness. They had done it. Against all odds, against the predictions of the great powers, against the limitations of their own resources, humanity had saved an entire species from extinction. 2.1 billion Veltari civilians were now safe in human space, beginning new lives on 23 different worlds. But the cost had been enormous. 47 ships had been lost during the evacuation, taking with them over 3,000 human crew members and 40,000 Veltari refugees. Hundreds of other ships had been damaged beyond repair. The human colonial fleet would take years to recover from the effort. The political earthquake that followed the successful evacuation had reshaped the entire galaxy. On the trading station at Proxima Junction, Corvan merchant Captain Velthor was discovering just how much the galaxy's attitude toward his people had changed. "I'm sorry," the Altarian dockmaster told him, "but Proxima Junction is no longer accepting Corvan vessels for resupply or repair services." "This is outrageous," Velthor protested. "The Corvan Trade Federation has had agreements with this station for over 2 centuries. You can't just cancel our docking rights." "Actually, we can," the dockmaster replied calmly. "Our contract allows us to refuse service to any government that fails to meet basic humanitarian standards. When the Veltari faced extinction, your people chose profit over lives. We choose not to do business with that kind of civilization." Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. The Corvan Trade Federation found their shipping routes mysteriously rerouted around systems that had once welcomed them. Trading partners were canceling contracts. Even neutral species were refusing to deal with them. The economic powerhouse that had controlled galactic commerce for centuries was being slowly strangled by its own greed. The ethereal collective was facing a different kind of crisis. For millions of years, they had justified their policy of non-interference by claiming it represented the highest form of wisdom. But after watching humanity save the Veltari while they did nothing, their philosophy was being questioned, even by their own people. Young ethereal philosopher Zenthara stood before the collective's grand assembly, her energy form flickering with unusual intensity. "The humans have shown us that action, not observation, defines true wisdom. While we watched a species die for the sake of our ancient principles, they chose to save lives for the sake of basic decency. The Grand Assembly remained silent, but their collective energy field rippled with uncertainty. For the first time in their long history, the ethereal collective was being forced to question whether their greatest wisdom might actually be their greatest failure. Meanwhile, in the rebuilt chambers of the Galactic Assembly, High Counselor Thesera was preparing to address the representatives of the major powers one final time. But she was no longer the desperate, dim figure who had pleaded for help 8 months earlier. Her crystalline form blazed with renewed light, powered by hope and the knowledge that her people had survived. She now represented the Veltari Diaspora Council, the governing body for Veltari communities spread across human space. Her people were not just surviving in their new homes, they were thriving. Veltari crystal technology was revolutionizing human agriculture. Their harmonic engineering was improving human construction techniques. Their artistic traditions were enriching human culture. Honored representatives, Thesera began, her voice ringing clearly through the assembly chamber, where months earlier her people had been abandoned to die. When extinction came for my species, this assembly offered us sympathy and regret. The great powers spoke of resource limitations and political complications. You offered kind words and empty promises. She paused, looking directly at each delegation that had refused to help. The Morvani ambassador shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Luxari representative's energy fields dimmed with what might have been shame. The Corvan delegate wouldn't even meet her crystal eyes. Humanity offered ships, Thesera continued. They offered sacrifice, they offered their very lives to save people they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. They proved that true civilization isn't measured by the size of your fleet or the age of your culture. It's measured by what you do when someone needs help. She gestured toward the human delegation, where Ambassador Kim Tae-hyung sat with quiet dignity. The galaxy will remember which response defines true civilization, and we will remember who stood with us when extinction came calling. As Thesera finished speaking, something unprecedented happened in the Galactic Assembly. Representatives from 47 different species, most of them smaller civilizations that had been ignored by the great powers, stood up and began walking toward the human delegation table. The Altarian Republic wanted to discuss mutual defense agreements. The Cygnus Commonwealth was interested in trade partnerships. The Vegan Alliance sought technological exchange programs. One by one, species that had never been considered important players in galactic politics were choosing to align themselves with humanity. Ambassador Kim Tae-hyung watched the scene unfold with amazement. In saving the Veltari, humanity hadn't just prevented an extinction. They had accidentally created a new power block in galactic politics. The great powers had ruled through fear and intimidation for so long that they had forgotten the simple power of doing the right thing. Ambassador, whispered his aide, the Denarian Confederacy is requesting formal alliance negotiations. That makes 38 species today. Kim Tae-hyung nodded, still trying to process what was happening. When humanity had first decided to help the Veltari, they hadn't been thinking about political advantages or strategic alliances. They had simply seen people who needed help and decided to provide it. But that simple act of decency was reshaping the entire galactic order. The age of the great powers was ending, and they had ended it themselves through their own callousness. The age of those who acted when action was needed had begun, led by a species that the establishment had dismissed as junior partners just months earlier. In the months that followed, the transformation continued. Human space became a beacon for refugees from across the galaxy. Species facing natural disasters, political persecution, or economic collapse found welcome in human colonies. The Veltari were no longer unique. They were simply the first of many to discover that humanity meant what it said about helping those in need. The great powers still had their massive fleets and ancient technologies, but power without compassion had proven to be no power at all. The galaxy was learning a lesson that humanity had always known. True strength comes not from what you can take, but from what you're willing to give. The humans had not only saved the Veltari, They had reminded an entire galaxy what it meant to be truly civilized.